their only skill set on the field is to pass it to a teammate, right? That's the only skill set they have. Then they are entirely dependent on the people around them.
Hello, and welcome to the Kick It with Katie podcast. Hey team, it's Katie here, and today I have Andrew Clifton, and Andrew is currently with the Kansas City Legends, and he also helps host a 3-man podcast called Coaching Inside the Box. And Andrew, why don't you go ahead and let the listener know where you're from, what your background is in soccer, and where your soccer career started.
Yeah, for sure. Well, first off, Katie, thanks for having me. I'm super excited to come on and chat to you guys. So yeah, I grew up in Kansas City, have lived in Kansas City my whole life, except for the 4 years that I was away at college. I started playing soccer, I don't know, when I was 5 or 6 probably, just at the local YMCA. Mom and dad signed me up. They didn't know anything about soccer, and I was an athletic, rambunctious kid that needed some energy. And then started playing for the Kansas City Legends, so the club that I'm with now. I started playing for them when I was, I want to say 6, and I played all the way through until I went off to college. I had the same coach from 6 to 17. My last club year, we had a different coach, but I had the same coach from 6 to 17. Went off and I played in college, small liberal arts school in Missouri. We were Division One the first 3 years, and then we transitioned back to Division Two, and they are still Division Two. It's called Drury University in Missouri. So played there. After college, I taught high school for a year, coached high school for 2 years, and then came back to Kansas City and started working for the club now, and have been a coach and a director for, nearly 20 years now at this point. So.
And for those that don't know, are you in the Missouri part of Kansas or the Kansas part of Kansas? Because for those of you that don't know, Kansas City is a giant city that goes over the border between 2 states. So which side are you on?
I'm from the good side, which is the Missouri side. For those of you that haven't been to Kansas City before, just about everything you know in Kansas City is on the Missouri side. Downtown, airport, Royal Stadium, Arrowhead Stadium. The only thing that's on the Kansas side is Sporting Kansas City. So their stadium is on the Kansas side.
Okay. Yeah, I was talking to, because we went to Overland Park for nationals, I don't know how many years ago, but we drove over there from Utah one time, and I was like, oh, let's go up to Branson, and my husband was like, that is not anywhere. He's like, it's like driving to St. George for us. It's about like a 4 or 5 hour drive or something like that. I don't know. And I was just like, oh, darn. Okay, whatever, But so it's not super close. And I also, you'll have to ask Andy about this. I don't know if since he's been in America enough, but I've also been told or seen memes about how we as Americans measure distance in time. So it's like a 4 hour drive, a 6 hour drive, and then like everywhere else in the world, they do it in kilometers.
100%. Yeah, and Andy would be able to speak to that. So would Philippe, to be honest.
Oh, that's true, because he's from Brazil. Yeah. But yeah, I just thought it was super funny. Anyway, so as a kid, I know that you've talked about on your podcast about, did you try other sports and what you tried to do as a kid and what you were interested in and how you focused all your energy on soccer?
Yeah, so I'm 40 now, so I grew up, before soccer had totally taken off in the same way that it has now, right? Like, growing up, it felt like in the 80s and the 90s, rec soccer had a giant participation rate, but club soccer did not. Like a highly competitive number of kids with quality coaches was fairly low, and it's grown a ton in the 2000s all the way to now. The participation rate in both rec and competitive or premier soccer, whatever term you use, has just ballooned. So in the 90s, I played every sport I could. I love sports. I played baseball at a pretty high level. Even in high school, I went to a small enough high school that I was able to convince the soccer coach and the football coach to let me play both sports during the season. So I've always enjoyed and appreciated and played a lot of other sports. But soccer I was really good at, and enjoyed and found to be a lot of fun. In part probably because I was good at it. It fed the fun, and so soccer was always kind of my first love and my primary sport. I remember in middle school, the baseball coach would tempt me if he knew there was a conflict between soccer and baseball at the same time. He'd say, "Hey, you're going to pitch in the game on Saturday at 1," trying to tempt me to go to baseball instead of soccer because I most often chose soccer.
Do you feel like soccer was more of a creative outlet for you versus the other sports where you don't like, I know with football or baseball, like you obviously have one set position and you have a specific role that you're going to do as far as, maybe plays or things like that. So do you feel that soccer gave you a little bit more freedom and creativity to be able to do a little bit more as an athlete?
Yeah, really good question. And yes, I mean, it's Andy in our podcast. Andy, he tells a story. It's been told on the podcast several times through different episodes, but it evaluates soccer versus every other sport, right? And it goes back to I think his master's in physical education in Wales, 700 years ago, whatever it was. But I think what makes soccer better than every other sport is it touches on all parts of sports, right? It's not just anaerobic fitness; it's also aerobic fitness, right? Where usually a sport is one or the other. It's the number of variables that exist within a soccer game are off the charts, right? There's one ball, you've got 10 teammates and 11 opponents, and everybody's moving and changing all the time, and that ball can be at various planes, and so it's a 360-degree game, and so there's just so much opportunity for creativity. Whereas I appreciate American football. I live in Kansas City, so I'm a giant Chiefs fan, right? But football, that it lacks that creativity, or that creativity comes from the coach. Hey,
Mm-hmm.
players, you're going to do this. It kind of has this warlike feeling where the generals call the shots. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
soccer, we're out there, we're making it up as we go, right? Sure, there's some pre-planned patterns that we kind of hit often because we play together, but the creativity is off the charts. And so, yeah, I think that was definitely a piece of it for me. I mean, I think the second piece too is growing up, the philosophy that my coach Andy will mention often because he's one of the guys on the podcast that I host. But Andy had this philosophy that we don't want to pigeonhole players to specific positions or roles within a team. And so, I played every position growing up. For the first 3 years of my college career, we were Division One as a Division One soccer player. I started a game at every position on the field except goalkeeper. And so I just had this well-rounded ability to step on the field and find playing time. And I think that skill set is obviously so valuable in sports, but I think it's valuable in life as well. When you're comfortable in a variety of roles and willing to get out of your comfort zone or push the edge of the envelope, you're a more well-situated adult that can have a bigger impact on society, on your career, on your job, whatever it is.
So talking about being pigeonholed, so what would you say to a player or a player's parent who is like, my kid only plays this position? I know I've been in that situation as a coach where I have, some players that are like, I will only play midfield or I will only do this. And, I've told them, well, if I need somebody to go in at right back, because of whatever, if you're not willing to play that position, you're just going to keep sitting on the bench, if you needed to go in. And so finding that willingness of players to be able to go on the field and fill that role, talking to players, I just last night to my 2015 girls, I talked to them about because I switched players up that were playing up in the first half. They played defense in the second half and moved them around a little bit. And I was, explaining to them, which maybe as 8-year olds they might not understand, but saying that part of playing offense and knowing how to play offense, you need to know how the defense is going to act and react and different things. So it's good to know all aspects of the game because that can make you better at a specific role, is knowing how they're going to play. obviously isn't eight. My twins are on that team, and it probably went right over their head. But trying to get that message across. But what would you say to a player or parent of a player who really is like, well, my kid only plays whatever position it is? What advice would you give them as far as being more open to trying other positions?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think my story specifically, I played 10 different positions as a college soccer player. Had I only played one position, I'd have had less playing time most likely. And so I think that's part of it. I think also the secondary, like, life lesson. I mean, the reason we play sports is for fun. The reason
Mm-hmm.
as parents we invest so much time and money and resources into our kids playing sports is not just for fun and exercise, although that's a piece of it. It's because we want the kids to learn life lessons while they're on the field.
Mm-hmm.
I oftentimes say to kids that and parents that are a part of my teams, soccer is my vehicle for teaching life lessons. Like, that's how we do it, and life is the only thing guaranteed is that change is a part of it. And so if you're only able to do one skill set, whether it's the discipline of soccer or some other discipline, it does narrow it a little bit for you. I think the other piece of it too is growth comes from challenge, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a balancing act that we as coaches have to hit right on the nose. But growth comes from challenge, and so we've got to push kids to get out of their comfort zone and be willing to be out of their comfort zone. To that same end, we can put kids in the deep end, right? Throw them in the deep end, and they can drown if they don't have the skill set to play at that level, they don't have the confidence to play at that level. And so
Mm-hmm.
when I'm talking to other coaches, I always say your priority number one is to build kids' self concept and their belief in themselves. And a part of that process is helping them be comfortable with mistakes and failure, because that's a natural part of the process. But if you have a kid that has a low self concept related to their skill set, I think it's important to actually give them a very specific, narrow role to find some confidence, to get some
Mm-hmm.
traction to build off of. As their self concept grows, you start putting them in other environments, and that could be positionally, right? You start playing them in another position or another couple positions, not exclusively, but as a way to challenge them. And you're constantly balancing that between pushing them out of their comfort zone and making sure they're growing in their self concept. I don't know if that answers your question at all. That's usually how I talk about this.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And it's definitely, I have seen players where maybe there's a specific skill that a coach needs them to work on. And so they do put them at a specific position for an entire season. So, I mean, and another thing about being pigeonholed is I feel like, and my husband explained this to me very well, is he said, you don't have to move them around every game. He's like, as long as there's movement within the season, or even if maybe like for the fall season they play a specific position and then in the spring they transition to a different position, as long as that movement is there and they see it, it doesn't necessarily have to be in the first half of a game. Like, what I did with my players is I played some of them at offense and some at defense, and then I basically did almost a swap in the second half. The game obviously changed and it was a little bit harder for us, but it gave those players the ability to try different skills, or taking players on one, or an outside back is going further up the field than what they were doing as forward in the first half. And so it builds different skills, but being pigeonholed. So for parents, when you're listening, as long as your coach is rotating them often, but that often could be once a game, once a week, once every other week. They might play a specific position for a game, an entire game, and then they get moved, or maybe they play on multiple rosters. I have a few players that float between two rosters in the same age group just based off of the need for players to fill those rosters out for games. And so for one roster, they play, offense, and the other roster, they play defense. Or I have a goalkeeper that plays goalkeeper for one team, and then she comes out on the field for another team. So she gets the opportunity to do both. So when I hear people say, pigeonholed, make the movement, as long as it's there, it just might not be as often as you'd like, but as long as it's happening, then it will help them with development. Because especially at younger ages, and I don't know how you guys feel about this, sometimes, if you put a player at a specific position in the first half, they're getting the grasp of it, and then you change it in the second half, then they go, oh, wait, now I have to transition and think differently. So sometimes at younger ages, maybe for a whole game, they play one position. Sometimes it's harder for kids to transition, and hopefully the coaches know the abilities of the players, like you were kind of saying, like if they need to build their confidence or whatever, they know what their skill level is, they know the level of the opponent or whatever it is that they're trying to do, and whether their player is going to be successful at that position or not, so that they can manage how that's working out. That's another thing that you have to manage as well. And I don't know if you have any comments on that.
No, it's funny that you mentioned that specifically. I think it was a week or two ago. Some of the club leadership and I were having a conversation. Our club, and we'll probably talk about it throughout the course of this episode, like is far on the extreme of development over success, and individual development over team development. That sometimes we have a problem where we were talking about some of our coaches are like having kids play 4 and 5 positions within one game. We were like, guys, that
Mm-hmm.
is way too extreme. Like, if kids don't know a role or don't develop confidence in there, if they're constantly in the middle of a storm, treading water, trying to survive, they cannot develop. They can't push forward. And so we were specifically talking about that. I think it's also not always positionally. It's more roles within the team. So I coach right now a 2007 girls team, a 2010 boys team, a 2013 boys team, and a 2015 girls team. So I've got literally the whole gamut.
Mm-hmm.
And my 2013 boys team specifically, I do this with most of my teams just in general. My 2013 boys team specifically, I have kids that play almost exclusively one position, um, but they play an attacking, that position is both an attacking and a defensive position.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if at whatever point I feel as though they're not getting the whole development as a soccer player, then I switch it up. But my center backs at 77 and 99 dribble so often
Mm-hmm.
that my center back will, in fact, on my 2013 team, that I've gone through spells where the center back is the highest scoring player on the field, right? And so, like, if I play him at forward, he's only beating 1 or 2 defenders off the dribble. If I play him at center back, he's potentially beating 4 or 5. And so,
Mm-hmm.
developmentally, from an attacking minded perspective, he's getting a better diet of what he needs to push himself as much as possible. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And I find that interesting because I have seen, I was just on Instagram this morning and saw some picture of Robert Lewandowski. He was a defender and now he's, an attacking player. And I've seen many central defensive players. I mean, it could be outside backs as well, but they played in that defensive role for an extended period of time, and they got so good at doing the dribbling and taking on multiple players and things like that, and then it made them into a phenomenal attacking forward or striker or something. And so some of those different roles can help you out in different positions. I know we've had several center backs who are stellar center backs and things like that, where if we're in a clutch game, they'll be thrown up top and they'll get us, the tying or winning goal for whatever tournament. They get that opportunity for us to advance or whatever it may be. And so it's kind of fun because for us, I feel like, the professionals do that all the time, where they go, hey, we need to take Puyol or PK, or I'm trying to think of
yeah.
center backs that I'm familiar with. But anyway, those are the two that are right off the top of my head. And Araujo, and they throw them up top and they go, hey, go score me a goal. Sergio Ramos, or whatever, just get up front and go get us a goal because they know they have that capability. So I always find that fun and interesting, like, because I did not know until, I don't know, sometime in the last year that Lewandowski used to be a defender. I wasn't that familiar with a lot of the foreign game until, like, when I was growing up, we didn't have cable. My parents said my grandparents had cable, and that was our extra fun thing, is we could go over to their house and they had a satellite dish or whatever. And so we had the
Yeah.
basic, like, 5 channels. And so we really didn't get to experience a lot of international games or soccer that was starting to be there in like the 90s and early 2000s that were starting to be streamed and stuff that you could watch. A lot of it was still really hard to find. And so I was not very familiar with a lot of any international play at all. I just, and now that we have the internet and YouTube and all these different streaming platforms, it's so much more accessible to be able to see all of the professional game and learn so much more about the game that I obviously know like I know general stuff, but like my husband, he's like a wealth of knowledge and he just remembers facts and everything. And so whenever I'm like, hey, what about this? And he'll just pull a stat out of his hat and I'm just like, I don't know where you get this from, but okay.
Yeah.
But okay, so how was your choice to as a player then choosing to go play collegiate soccer? Did you choose the college that you went to based off of what you wanted to pursue as a player or as a student? And then getting to play soccer. How was that for you? And I know a lot of the recruiting processes now and finding schools are different than what they used to be, but how was that choice for you?
Yeah. So at 18, I didn't know what my future career was. And, I graduated high school in 2002. And so like really even pro options at that time were fairly limited. And so like, wouldn't even have said like, oh, I want to go play professional soccer. In hindsight, I wish I would have had that perspective. Maybe my work rate and effort and commitment to the game would have been different in college. Not as though it was bad, but obviously others, could have been more.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't really know what I wanted to my future career to be, and so I chose where I went to play on really two criteria. Criteria one was, did I think that soccer team and coach and culture and environment was that one that I felt like I would enjoy and excel in? And then secondarily, was the school an environment where I thought I could find a home and find happiness? And I narrowed it down to a few schools. University of Memphis was one of my final choices. Obviously, Drury University is where I ended up going. Those two schools are drastically different. Memphis is big and public, and Drury is 1,500 students and small and private. And those were probably my two final choices. But both of them, I saw myself as potentially being a good fit, and both from a soccer perspective, and I would enjoy the school. I would enjoy the campus life. Um, Ended up picking Drury. Scholarship wise, they were pretty similar in terms of offer. Drury probably cost my mom a little bit more money because my scholarship was only, I want to say like 65 or 70%. And so she still had to pay some, but it was a private school. So that sum was more than probably the public offer at Memphis. But I felt, I knew I'd play right away. And I think maybe that was maybe the straw that broke the camel's back. But I sometimes wish I'd have gotten to do it twice and gone to both schools, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And when you transitioned from your club days to collegiate, was it a huge transition for you? I know that some players, when they go, especially going away from home, it's kind of a culture shock and it takes them a little bit to get acclimated or they get homesick or things. So, how was that for you mentally and the soccer wise? Was it like a huge leap? Because I know a lot of times I hear players, you could be an 18, 19-year old or 17-year-old playing against early 20s kids, men that are a little bit more developed and bigger than you. So how was that the soccer aspect of it as well?
Yeah. I have so many thoughts on this. Generally speaking, it was a good transition, right? Like my freshman year, I played quite a bit. I think I started half the game. So in fact, I scored my first goal against University of Illinois Chicago in the first game that I played, right? So I had success right away. But I will say that I never counted minutes until I got to college. Our club always had a pretty much equal playing time perspective. Everybody's going to play. Everybody's going to play equally. Our focus is on development, not winning games. And so we all sat in a rotation. And so I typically play forward or sometimes like a number 10 and sometimes a wide midfielder. And I'd be in a rotation. So I'd know how much I was going to play that day based on how many people were in that rotation. So it was equal playing time. In high school, I never came off the field, right? So like I never really counted minutes. But in college, it was like, oh, okay, some of those guys are going to be on the bench and they're not going to touch the field, or some guys are only going to get 10 minutes a half. And I would have moments of like that during freshman and sophomore year where I didn't play 80 minutes or I didn't play 65 minutes. And so it was the first time I ever got into this space of counting minutes, which was an adjustment, a psyche adjustment in terms of like a greater challenge to my self concept. I always had I still have a pretty high self level of self belief, but during college it was challenged probably more than any other time in my soccer career. And it's funny. I'm a dad. Obviously, I've got three kids, and my daughter's a sophomore in high school. And she made the varsity team this year, and she's played entirely for me until she got to high school. And so the high school season, she's obviously not playing for me. And I'm like back in the old college days, counting minutes, watching rotations, how and like obviously not talking to her about it, but I've shared with my wife like this is kind of the life of what I found to be a college soccer player, counting minutes and pushing to try to get a few more minutes and make sure you're staying in the rotation or finding that time.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting concept because I've heard people talk about it on my podcast and others that I've listened to where you might have been the best player on your team and you played all the minutes of all the games or whatever it was, and then you go to college and you have to remember that it's basically a collection of players who were maybe the best players on their teams as well, and so everybody's fighting for minutes, fighting for spots and things. So it's definitely a different dynamic as far as club youth soccer versus collegiate soccer, because none of those minutes are guaranteed when you get to that college level or professional level. And so you're fighting for those spots and fighting for those minutes that maybe you didn't have to on your club team. And so it's definitely a transition there. I know I've seen some people, family members, that it was definitely a bruise to their ego as far as transitioning, because they were seen as these great players and they could do great things and whatever. And then they get there and they're middle of the pack or even the lower part of the pack, or because they were freshmen, they were the water boys, that kind of a thing.
Yeah, yeah,
They weren't respected like they had been, because you're at such a high level, you're graduating, you're seniors, and then you just go back to being like bottom of the totem pole. And so it's really an ego thing for some players, where are you going to be able to manage through it, and are you going to be able to overcome it, or are you going to let it affect you and affect your game, or are you going to push through it and fight for those minutes and fight for your spot? How are you going to respond to that situation and scenario? And it really just depends on what that player wants to do. Are they going to fight for it or not?
yeah. And if I can isolate myself from most of the listenership from an equal playing time perspective, I say that as a joke. Most people don't do it that way at competitive club soccer.
Mm-hmm.
I think competing for playing time and having a bruised ego and having to challenge through that, I think that is such a great life lesson.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't think it's an appropriate life lesson for a 10-year-old to learn, or a 13-year-old, or a 15-year-old year round. I think high school, at least in my neck of the woods, is 3 months of the year. That's a great thing to experience for 3 months. But for the other 9 months of the year, I think kids need to play to develop and learn and to build a positive self concept. Whether it's exactly equal or not is a different conversation. But if a kid's playing 5 minutes of a half or 10 minutes of a half, if they're playing 10 or 15% of a game, they're not learning. I mean, imagine a scenario where you're taking your 14-year-old and you're saying, look, in class, you don't get a math book until the best 11 math students are done studying, and then we'll pass you one of theirs so you can work on it. Like soccer should be on a youth level, whether it's competitive, premier, or whatever. In my opinion, it should be a vehicle to teach and to learn, and it should be a space for education. And you can't learn while you're sitting the bench. I mean, it's just as simple as.
Mm-hmm.
There's my soapbox. But if but it's a big soapbox. I talk about it as often as I can.
Yeah, and it's a concept that's really hard for coaches and sometimes parents to understand, especially, when they go, my player is elite or whatever they think in their mind. And, they're like, they deserve to play all the minutes. And so when you're rotating people, it's very difficult. I know as a coach, and I've seen this happen, I've done it myself. I try to avoid it as much as possible. As coaches, we know what players are skilled at, what level of skill level they're at. And sometimes you'll have players that are a little bit behind. Some of them are a little bit more advanced. And when I set up a lineup for a game, an early coaching mistake on my part was, putting my, very best players all on the field at once. And then I had to sub. And then when I put the subs in, the level of the game changed drastically. And for me, obviously, I was trying to get everybody equal playing time as well, and so I had people that were out on the bench and sitting there because it was other people's turn to go into the game. And I made a coaching mistake in myself where I'm confident in my player's ability, but obviously I could see the level of game go down, and so I felt like maybe I should have done my subs differently so that there was still some players that were able to assist and help out and guide the other players that maybe weren't as, and I'm talking about like 8-year-olds here, people. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
they're still young, 8 to 10-year-olds. And so maybe there were other players that had been more seasoned and understood like the concept of the game. Cause some of the players that I would get are still, coming right from rec or have never played before. They played soccer as far as like dribbling the ball, but that's kind of it. They haven't played structured, organized soccer, which, just trying to grasp them as far as like staying on our side of the, we're attacking this direction, dribbling towards that goal type of a thing. But having people on the field at the same time as other people that didn't understand the game as well and help guide them, not necessarily like go take the ball from them, but at least, let them know which direction we should go in and that type of a thing as far as assisting on the field as well as me coaching. But I made the mistake of, having what coaches would say, all my strong players, and then I put weak players in, and then the level of the game changes. Whereas me as a coach, I want to try and see a more consistent level throughout the game. That way everybody's getting challenged more versus, so obviously I had to like think about my rotations and how I wanted things to go differently. And so somebody that maybe used to start was now sitting the bench for the first part of the game and subbing in. And so their parents had issue with that, and I had to explain to them they're still going to play, but I need them to sub in so that they can be that support when another player comes off the field, so that we're still organized and we're still structured on the field, and doing that. And I don't know where I was going with this, but
No, subbing and rotations from a coaching perspective, especially especially so at 77 and 99, when the momentum of the game can switch on a dime. I think the way in which you do your rotations and positionally where you play players can make a big difference if you want to both have a developmental or when you want to have as maximally developmental as experience as possible. And if
mm-hmm,
you lose all the time, and I don't even mean games. I mean, if every time you get the ball, you lose the ball, developmentally,
mm-hmm.
that is not a good scenario to be in. And so you're constantly as a coach trying to figure out how to push those levers or pull those levers to make them work for the kids.
Yeah, and it definitely, like, I know as a novice coach, I think the first couple of games that I did by myself, because like the first season that I coached, I like did co-coaching with another coach, and so we worked together. But there were some games where one of us could only be there, not both of us, and so I remember being super anxious, and I was trying not to like let people know. And it's a no score league, so nobody's reporting the scores anywhere, but I was super nervous that I was going to mess something up and that all the parents were going to be so mad at me, and I was just like, just be confident in yourself, you know what you're doing. Like, I've coached like my son's team, if as an assistant or whatever, and they are very confident boys that just know the game. They know they can do their own warm ups. They're very self sufficient. Like I go, okay, what do we do now as far as, if I had to run a practice, they go, oh, well, we need to set these cones up. And they have players that just go, okay, I'll go set the stuff up or, for you or whatever. And they're very, they're aware. Some players like, if I would tell my players, my girl players right now, go set up cones for this exercise, I don't know if they'd be able to do it. Whereas these boys who are just a year older would have been able to, at a younger age, just go and set it up and start their own
Yeah.
exercises. It's a different mentality. But having that confidence and just learning from my mistakes was like a huge thing where I go, okay, I need to make sure that I don't do that in the future, because obviously the level of the game changed and you could see it and you could feel it. And I'm like, I don't want that to happen again. I want them to still be driving successfully forward together and progressing forward and trying to, pass together or dribble together and attack together, defend together. Whereas, if a certain combination of players, you can tell that the level of play dips versus rising. You want to make sure that you have players that are playing together that are going to motivate each other to play at a higher level as well.
Sure. 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 Yeah.
So, after your college career, so how did you get back into coaching after after you ended your, I'm assuming you ended your college career and didn't play after that.
Yeah. I in college I played PDL. PDL was, I mean, sometimes people called it semi-pro. Not it was semi-pro in as much as you could pay players in the league, but most of the teams didn't. It was basically college players playing summer all-star ball, if that makes sense.
Did you play, and I don't know if this is the same timeline, did you play the Salt Rats from Utah?
We never did, no. So
Okay.
we were in like a central division. So the furthest west we would go is we would play in Denver or Boulder. Rapids
Okay.
had a PDL team.
Okay.
Was the furthest west we went. But through that process, obviously, Sporting Kansas City now used to be the Kansas City Wizards, and so through that process, we would go and train with them, or we would play against them in friendlies around kind of the Kansas City-ish area to recruit fans in unique spots around Kansas City, and we trained with them, and so it was pretty obvious to me that I was good enough to join the field with them. And if they needed a practice player, which in those days their rosters were small, they needed them often. I was good enough to fill that role, but I was not good enough to play MLS. And so it was pretty obvious to me from that perspective. And the Kansas City Comets is a pro indoor team that's existed in Kansas City for a long time. It went on like a 3 or 4 year hiatus just as I finished college. I actually
Mm-hmm.
think I would have I would have gone and played for them, or I definitely think I was good enough, but didn't work out. So I went on and I taught high school, and I got a coaching job with the high school right out of college. And so I graduated in May, and I was running the first day of high school tryouts for the boys team the first week of August. So just a few months later, I was still involved in the game. Funny enough, I think it was the worst high school team in the state of Missouri history. I'm being a little hyperbolic there, but I had 8 boys show up to that first day of tryouts, and 8 does not make a team.
Mm-mm.
So but it was a super fun experience. Loved it. Taught high school for that year. And then Andy, my mentor, my coach growing up, he called me up in like April of that first year and said, "Hey, Andrew, we've got this preschool soccer concept called Happy Feet that's doing really well in Kansas City. We're going to franchise it. We're going to start selling the business and seeing if people want to start it in their own city. Would you have any interest in starting it in Springfield, Missouri, which is where I was?" And I really enjoyed teaching. Assumed that was going to be my career, and I quickly did the math, and I was like, you know what? I think I can make more money running this preschool little soccer franchise and build my own club in that city out of the preschool soccer program. So, and work full time in soccer. So I'm going to give that a go. And so I hopped into that right away. So I only taught high school for 1 year. Did full time soccer in Springfield, building my own little business that eventually would have built into a club. My wife and I were newly married, and 3 months after getting married, we were like, "Wait, we got a little one on the way," and so we decided to move back to Kansas City. And so when I moved back to Kansas City, I called up Andy and said, "Hey, I'm really digging all of this work, but I would like to move back to Kansas City. Do you got a job for me?" And so I came in and became a director within the club and helped build that franchise network out, initially across the U.S., but then eventually in other countries as well. So soccer just became what I did from a coaching perspective, from age 20, 23, I guess, all the way until now.
And when did you start getting into your coaching licensing? Like, how did you start going up the ranks with that? And I know it's a little bit more, I don't know if it's like more structured now. I know, sometimes they would waive certain things, like if you had played college and you got grandfathered into certain licenses and things. So I don't know that they still do that. I don't remember how that works. Obviously, I didn't play collegiate, so I have no idea.
Yeah.
But as far as like going up through your coaching licensing courses and things, how was that for you?
Yeah. So I've never done a licensing course through U.S. Youth or U.S. Soccer. Everything that I've done from a coaching education perspective has been through United Soccer Coaches, formerly National Soccer Coaches Association of America. I've actually run sessions at several of the United Soccer Coaches conventions, both classroom and field sessions. And so all of any coaching education I've done has been in that space. No specific reason other than our coaching philosophy within our club um, is it's completely counter to the coaching courses that U.S. Soccer put on, and so there's no specific value other than just having a piece of paper that I can use to promote my skill set as a coach, and it's never been necessary, and so I've never gone down that path. United Soccer Coaches has, I mean, they're based in Kansas City as well, but they're quite large. Their convention every year has 10, 15,000 visitors. It's the largest convention, soccer coaches convention in the world. Um, but United is a little bit more of an open platform, more of a brainstorm, sharing ideas, what works for you, what works for you, whereas U.S. Soccer has a more structured approach. So I've always been a significantly bigger fan of coaching education that values opinions and values different perspectives.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think for coaches out there, a lot of us have obviously different personalities, different backgrounds, and the way we want to execute things. And sometimes some of the resources that, the grassroots courses that I've taken, sometimes they are valuable. And sometimes I'm like, I don't really see any value in this type of a thing. I've seen it. I've seen other coaches say the same thing. So if you're a potential coach, obviously look at the pathway that works best for you and whatever
Yeah,
you're required to do.
yeah,
Sometimes it's a requirement that you have XYZ licensing from
yeah.
whatever.
And I've run into those challenges a few times, right, related to various USYS events and leagues and platforms. And so, luckily, up until now, it's worked out that the coach that I'm coaching with has a B or has a C or has an A, and so it hasn't been a challenge. But in no way am I necessarily bashing U.S. Soccer's coaching platform. Coach training is good.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody should do it. It's just that specific platform has never I've never had a need for it, and so I've done my coaching education in other areas.
Yeah, and I've seen other coaches that have done multiple platforms. They've
Yeah,
done
of
the
course. Yeah,
the grassroots. They've done what you've done. They've done European ones. They've done
yeah,
all sorts of different ones because they want to have a massive knowledge of different aspects of the game and trying to figure out what works best for them. And so that's always great to have people that have different arsenals that they can pull from to trying to decide what is best to execute for their specific team's needs. Because I know coaches who they coach like you coach multiple teams, and what works for one team doesn't work for another group of
hmm
kids, and so it's a balance. Whereas you say, I always take my husband for example because I live with him and I see all the things that he does and I know all the teams that he coaches, and so I will see him coaching one team one way and he coaches another team another way, or maybe he tried to coach both teams similarly, but then he had to tweak it and modify it to best fit what those kids needs and their, what they can do as players and as a team. And so it's those types of coaches that are able to see the skill set of the players that they have, and they're able to mold something and create something new and specific for that team. I've always found that very interesting, the coaches that versus the coaches that are like, this is my coaching style, this is how I'm going to coach whatever team it is, and this is how we're going to execute it, and do you like it or not? I feel like that's very old school,
Yeah.
back in the day, where we just have this one team plan and this is how it goes and this is how I coach all my teams, versus being able to change things up. I know with some teams they play different formations and a different training and tactical styles, and sometimes from game to game they coach differently at different ages. It obviously takes different verbal cues and things. What you yell out to a U18 team is going to be totally different for a U10 team. um, Different temperaments, boys and girls. Some obviously boys and girls don't always react the same way, to specific things. So jumping from one to the other is also difficult as well. So it's very interesting to see the different coaching styles that you see on the sides of the fields and how they're able to execute that. So as far as your Kansas City Legends are going, I know. So you're because I've listened to your podcast and I've done a little bit of research, and like we've talked about previously, I don't think we've talked about it on here, but I interviewed a mom who has some players at your guys' club, and the coaching style that you guys implement is different than most. I will say probably different than probably what 99% of the way people train their teams. And so why don't you go ahead and talk about your guys' philosophy and the coaching style of your club and what benefits you have seen from how you're executing coaching inside the box.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So, I mean, this is a brainchild of Andy. Andy being my mentor, he was the guy that started the club. He's English, came over to the United States in 1985, and have started our club, I think, in like 1989, which probably is the year that I started playing for him. We prioritize individual development over team development. I mentioned that. But like, what does that specifically look like? Well, deceptive dribbling, so beating players off of the dribble in the 1v1, is at the heart of literally who we are. And goal scoring is the second piece. And so, from a what does our training session look like? It's actually really simple and really straightforward. Um, when kids are first with us, we teach them individual fakes and moves: scissors, Maradonas, step overs, Matthews, Cruyffs. We've got 6 of them specifically that we teach, and we drill them into the kids. And then, as soon as they start learning those skills and they're playing within practice or game structures, we never say the word pass. It is just skill, 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 and praising them for trying the skills, praising them when they fail, praising them when they have success. As a result, we have if kids start with us young, we have 6 and 7 year olds that are doing things off of the dribble that are jaw dropping. I mean, just really, really impressive stuff. As we move out of that skill learning phase into putting it under pressure, we play 1v1 almost exclusively, meaning almost all of every practice is 1v1. What does that look like? Well, it's not lines. Nobody stands in a line. We have, if we're on a small field and we've got 10 kids we're training, there's 5 simultaneous games of 1v1 going in 2 or 2.5 or 3 minute shifts. And then we take score, and then we go back out and they play a different opponent. And that's practice. And we'll finish with a fun scrimmage because kids want to scrimmage, but the scrimmage is not we're not working on passing concepts or team concepts. The scrimmage is just a fun cherry on the top of working really hard in practice. And then we transition from 1v1 into 2v2. So the same thing, 2 players playing against 2 other players in a small space, very crowded, everybody going at the same time. And in there, they're deceptive dribbling. It's 2v2. There's a ton of ball. But now we're working on some team concepts: wall passes, overlaps, some combination play, but done in a really tight environment. We don't practice in a, like, our, we don't do anything outside of 1v1 and 2v2. We do 4v4, but 4v4 is more just like the scrimmage, the cherry on top, the fun session, if you will. We don't do anything in training outside of that. That is who we are, and that is what we do. And has been for a really long time. It's always odd. I feel weird bragging on our club or our success, but somebody might hear that and go, well, how do you develop players that play at a high level? Well, that was me. Like, I went off to college. My entire soccer career was this. And I played Division I college. And I mentioned earlier that, I scored in the first game and started half of my games as a freshman. I never felt as though technically or tactically I was behind or didn't understand the concepts, or when coach was like, we're going to play two touch only in training sessions in college, I couldn't do it. I always could keep up. But when it came time to take somebody on 1v1 or create a little space in a crowd to be able to deliver a pass, nobody on the college team could touch me. I was head and shoulders above everybody else on that front. And so from a philosophical perspective, that's where we are. We made a big change, though, as a club. We go back to 1989. In 2009, we decided we'd build a small indoor field in the warehouse connected to our club offices. And that took our club off on a rocket ship. And we now have 4 indoor training centers in Kansas City, in different parts around Kansas City, so that more kids can access them. And our teams train almost exclusively. 98% of their sessions are only done on a small turfed, boarded field, or in what we call box soccer. So think batting cages with walls, but shooting exercises. That is all the training that we do. And our club has, I don't know, 40, 50 kids that have gone on to play professionally at some level over the last 25 years. And we've really punched above our weight and do it really differently.
Yeah, and I've been really interested in this concept because I know a lot of what we try and do as far as developing, and I'm speaking for like me and my household. I can't necessarily speak for all the other coaches in my area, but what we try to do is obviously develop the players and as a team, but do it individually in a group setting, obviously, and give them those opportunities to take those players on and develop those individual skills because they're going to need those individual skills their entire career. And that's the only thing that they can take with them. They can't take their teammates with them who might be able to run specific passing plays with them. You're not going to take an entire team and go play collegiately together somewhere. It's not going to happen. And so having those individual skills to showcase and advertise, and if that is your desire to go and play, collegiate soccer or professional soccer or whatever, that's your branding, I guess branding yourself. I don't know. But that's the best way for you to develop as a player is doing it individually and playing against players that are of a similar skill set so that you're being challenged. And so I found that very interesting when I listened to your guys' philosophy and how that works. And so for those people, because I know that like when I started coaching, I asked for advice as far as what these younger players should be focusing on. And I was told just dribbling, 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 dribbling. They need to have the ball at their feet. Like you said, no lines, less lines as much as possible, having a ball at their feet as much as possible so that they're comfortable with it and things like that at those younger ages. And so that's the environment that I try to produce as well. It's obviously not indoors. It doesn't look like yours, but that's something that I try to replicate as well so that players have a ball at their feet as much as possible. And it's hard for people to buy into that concept when they see a team the same age and level who can pass the ball around another team. So how do you try and tell people what your process is trying to do versus maybe what the other process of being able to just pass, because that's one of the things that I've found very interesting is where People are like, oh, they pass the ball around us as, like 8-year-olds. And I'm like, yeah, but our players, like 90% of our players are trying to attack on the dribble and develop their individual skills, which sometimes they don't see that. So how do you get people to understand what the concept is for them to, because a lot of people now want that instant gratification of that early win for an 8-year-old, a 9-year-old, and telling them, hey, being able to pass the ball isn't necessarily at this age going to make you a better soccer player as like a 15-year-old. You can learn the passing later versus trying to teach a teenager how to dribble a ball might be a little bit more difficult than trying to teach a 6-year-old how to dribble a ball.
Yeah. I mean, I have several rebuttals, and it depends on the conversation that I'm having, or the rebuttal. Maybe that I have several different ways in which I'll discuss that with a parent or anybody from that perspective. Let me first go from an maybe the most academic response, which is individual first, team second is not bonkers. It's not crazy. It's what every child psychologist would tell you to do. Just every education expert would tell you to do. Independence first, always. Maslow's hierarchy needs will tell us that, right? Like if people aren't good individually, if your person is not healthy and safe with a strong self-concept, they can't be a good teammate. They can't be a good family member. And so that's a really key piece that sometimes I'll lean into.
Mm-hmm.
Secondarily, sometimes if I'm feeling kind of spicy or cynical, I might ask a parent, did you play soccer growing up, right? Which increasingly now the answer is yes, but not always. Still, maybe
Mm-hmm.
not even most of the time. No, I didn't. Okay, but you understand, right? The concept that if I have the ball and I have two people on me, if I pass it 10 feet to my left to the person that's wide open, that's a skill, like that's better for the team, right? You get that, right? That's a really simple concept. You understand. Yeah, 8-year-olds mentally aren't there,
Mm-mm.
right? And so like let's be more efficient in the way that we talk about and educate our kids. Let's not encourage them to do something that is not like naturally part of their thought process, going back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs specifically, right? And so let's save that for later. They'll eventually get it. I mean, I'll talk about it, but let's not rush through it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, and the last thing is, and this is a little bit more convoluted, but if I feel like I'm having a conversation and kind of buying into it, I'll go here, which is, again, soccer is a vehicle to teach life lessons, right? And if we have kids or players that when they get the ball, their only skill set on the field is to pass it to a teammate, right? That's the only skill set they have. Then they are entirely dependent on the people around them. And we as parents want the last thing for our kids long term to be dependent on others for their own success. We want kids to be able to work with others. Don't get me wrong. But if they can only work with others and they can't count on themselves to take care of themselves or find success, then we're limiting their potential. We're limiting their future, if you will. And so I think that microcosm exists within soccer, or I think that analogy exists within soccer as well. We want our players to be able to take the responsibility when the game's on the line and something needs to happen. Give me the ball, I'll make it happen. We want that type of confidence. And you're
Mm-hmm.
never going to get that level of confidence if your focus from a young age, or even from 13, 14, has always been when you get it, you give it. When you get it, you give it. Two touches only, sideways and backwards. That's not how you develop somebody that says, here, give me the ball. Messi is not, he's who he is. He's making things happen because he wants the ball.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we're constantly teaching kids to get rid of the ball, they're never going to develop that skill set in on the soccer field or in life. And I think that's maybe at the core of how I have that conversation.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult for parents, especially at those younger ages where, this is a team sport. And yes, it is a team sport, but it's also sometimes it's a selfish sport as far as,
Yeah.
having that ability to let a player at the especially at those younger ages just dribble the ball. I now that I've been in coaching longer and I've learned more of these concepts where I'm at a 4v4 game or whatever, and I hear coaches, yelling, pass it, pass it, pass it. And it's like, that kid has so much space to dribble. Why aren't you telling him to dribble? You want him to
Yeah.
be self sufficient with feet on the ball and being able to attack, especially at those younger ages. And I feel like they have more fun sometimes when they're able to dribble the ball and try out new things. Like you said, you don't want them to be scared to hold the ball at their feet and thinking that they need to just get rid of it every time that they receive it. I know I've been in coaching instances where a player, I coach mostly girls, but she'll get the ball, and so she is just a general thing. She'll get the ball and then immediately, either one or two touch, she'll take it and then she'll just kick the ball away. That's a turnover. She doesn't even pass it to anybody, but she immediately just kicks the ball away. And obviously, this is just any player at any point can do this. My own kids have done this. But it's something that I'm trying to, I guess, kill out of them, make it die, smother it. I don't know. I want them at these ages to feel confident, to be able to receive the ball. And then we had a player, Brecca Mazingo, she came and spoke to some of my players within our club. She said, when you receive that ball first touch, you should be deciding, do I need to pass or dribble? And at those younger ages, really, it's just me and the ball. It's just, that's the things that they can think about are just me and the ball. And so what are they going to do with the ball? Probably they're going to dribble it. We don't want to force them to just kick the ball away. I don't want my outside backs in our formations. I've told them, I said, if you have space to dribble, I want you to dribble up the field as far as you can. And then if you have the ability to pass the ball to a teammate or whatever, shoot the ball, just go as far up the field as you have that space. I don't want them in any position to feel limited that they have to immediately get rid of the ball. And so sometimes it's really hard for some of those players to grasp that concept because some of them, I'm coaching them for the first time, and maybe their prior coach didn't give them that space and ability to be creative in themselves, and I've had to have multiple little chats with some of my teams over the last year about saying, hey, I'm giving you this opportunity to be creative, and that's what I want you to try and do. If you make a mistake, I'm not going to be upset. I'm going to be happy that you're trying to execute whatever it is that you're trying to do, and like you said, you praise them for trying to attempt something. And so that way they don't feel bad. Sometimes maybe, why did you try and dribble the ball there? You should have passed it. You shouldn't be, smothering their creativity. You should be trying to praise it that they wanted to try and attempt to do something. And then as they get older, learning when those spaces are, when is a proper time to dribble versus passing. Those are the types of things that you teach them as they get older. And that's what we should be teaching them, because I know we have some very good teams in our area, and but at like I said, sometimes I'll watch them play and I'm like, man, they are really good at executing these types of passings and things. But I'm like, I wonder how these players would be individually. Would they be able to attack us, 1v1 or things like that? Are they given that opportunity to be a creative individual player versus working together as a team? I know I've seen teams that are just robots. They know exactly where the other players are going to be and they can pass the ball around everywhere, but it's like, do you have that creativity and ability to execute those 1v1 situations? Or like you said, do they always rely on their teammates to be there for them, or are they able to say, hey, I'm going to take matters into my own hand and execute going forward and doing whatever they need to do? And that's part of the game is learning all of that.
I think part of like the fast food culture, I'll say, I've gotten into this in numerous episodes on our podcast, but like the I want it now, and I want it exactly how it's going to look, pervasive piece of our society, right? And it's only becoming more so. Social media is helping us get there. Is that okay? Our kids are going to play soccer. Okay, great. We need this to look like what I see on TV, or I just saw this awesome thing reel on Instagram of a Pep Guardiola practice session with Manchester City players. I'm going to do that with my U12 team. Like they're missing the forest of the trees there, if that makes sense. And we don't have to go far for really good concrete examples of individual first, team second. I can assure you that Messi, Maradona, Ronaldo, Marta, those players that have ascended to the level that they have, they were playing pickup soccer with their friends in their neighborhood, in where they grew up, and nobody was standing around telling them to pass the ball. Were they passing it some? Yeah. But the kid that had the ball at his feet the most, that was Diego Maradona. That was Messi. That's why they got more touches on the ball. So they were better than everybody else. And that just fed itself over time. We can look at basketball just the same. The players that are in the NBA, the best league in the world, those players aren't focused, especially when they're younger, aren't focused on, team passing, the 3-man weave stuff, right? They're playing 1v1 and 2v2 basketball in their neighborhood, on their street, in the local gym. And it's that develops those individual skills that on the best teams in the world, that coach says, okay, now how do we meld that into a team piece? The initial question that started this that you asked me is like, it's hard when you see 8-year-old teams knocking the ball around. How do you educate your parents and get them to buy into what you do? And it's constant sales or education. It's constantly educating them on the value. When I first have a team, especially a young team, it is really common for me to have the halftime talk, not on my side of the field, but right in front of where all the parents are sitting. And so that the information I'm giving the kids, where I'm praising little Johnny, when you get the ball over there in that corner, you try to Maradona turn. I don't care that they stole it and went and scored on us. Johnny, your Maradona turn, that's the win. I changed the game. The game isn't about goals. The game is about the effort or the try on that specific skill. And I'm enthusiastically giving Johnny a high five. And then the parents start to feel it. They're like, oh, okay, now I know what coach wants from them. And so then they start praising that from the sideline. So then they're not yelling, send it, boot it, kick it, get it out of there, right? They're yelling, whoa, what an awesome try of a scissors or whatever it is. And so it's that constant educational piece that's so important. And it pays off in spades as a coach if you've coached a team for 5 or 6 years, is those parents become so bought into what you're doing because they understand it or feels that they understand it from such an intense level because they're part of the halftime talk. They're part of the post-game speech, if that makes sense. And I think that's super necessary to scale this thing and make it actually work over the long term. The last thing on this front that I want to mention is there is this is growing in a positive way. More and more of our soccer culture in the United States is recognizing the value of dribbling and taking players on. The problem is, from my perspective, is they keep it to the younger age groups and the younger age groups only. U.S. Soccer calls U12 the dawning of tactical awareness. It's when kids, from a mental perspective, from a intellectual perspective, can understand the team concepts. It's when they start to understand it. And so it's immediately like, great, I've taught them how to dribble and be an individual player. Now I'm going to teach them all team stuff. What that is regretting to realize is that between 12 and 15, kids are going to hit puberty and they're going to grow. And their body mass is going to double in size. And all of that new tissue, all of that new muscle, if it wasn't grooved in how to do a Maradona turn under pressure and how to do a scissors under pressure, even if the 15-year-old conceptually gets, I'm in a 1v1, I should take this player on and beat them. If they haven't done it time and time again between 12 and 15, physically their body's not going to have it. They're not going to be able to do it. And so it is so important, in my opinion, to keep that pushing of individual stuff going right up through puberty. And so I of course talk about spacing, talk about passing. We do. My 2013 team is 10 years old largely, and so we're doing 2v2s a lot in practice. So a lot of that is happening. But if I ever feel like the individual skill is dropping and they're not taking players on in the dribble, I go back into 1v1 mode because I know if I don't, they'll not have it when they're 16, which is when we want them to have it. Most notably, if they're going to go on to play college soccer at the highest level.
Yeah, it's definitely something that you have to keep around. Like, obviously they need to have that individual skill, polished, basically, making sure that they're confident in it. And so that way, when it is time for them to call upon it in their game, that they are ready and they've been doing it consistently at a consistent basis. And some of the things that I hear on the sidelines of games is, oh, I wish that kid would pass more. And it's like, no, I want that kid, to dribble. I want him to be able to attempt and try and take that on. And so I say
But
that
that
in my
comment
mind.
is rooted in selfishness. I wish that kid would pass more because I want my kid to get the ball,
Hmm.
right? Like it's all rooted in selfishness, and so I think it takes. I think in some ways it's oftentimes like or selfishness, like I want to win this game as a parent, right? As opposed to I want to win in the long term. Um, uh, we Andy oftentimes says winning is what's important now, what improvement next. Winning, especially for kids, is about improvement. It's not about goals and games and scoreboard.
Yeah, and it's a very hard concept for some parents to understand that sometimes what one player needs to do isn't necessarily what another player needs to do. Their needs might be different than what another player needs, depending on their skill level and things. And so it might look differently from the coach's perspective and what the coach wants each player to execute, as far as, what their role is on the field for that moment. And sometimes parents don't know what the coach has said, depending on the age and things, whether it's been communicated, hey, this is what my job is for today for the game or whatever. And so it's very interesting to see those concepts coming out, and where you say, oh, if he passed more, that's not selfish, whereas like you're saying, that's a selfish comment where maybe your kid should be receiving the pass or things. And so it's really hard for us as parents, from a parent perspective, going, oh, I wish my player had passed the ball to whoever was wide open. Or if your player was wide open in front of the goal, oh, I wish so and so would have passed it to my player in front of the goal and then they would have scored. Well, there's no saying that your player would have scored. Maybe they would have, maybe they wouldn't have, who knows. But it's very difficult for the parents to understand as far as what the coach is trying to execute as far as development for each player. And hopefully, as a parent, if you're in a situation, you're able to talk to your coach and say, hey, what is your plan, or what is the plan for my player as far as what they need to be focusing on, or what their game times need to be looking like, or things like that. And so hopefully what that is, and or are able to communicate with your coach what that plan needs to be executed like.
Yeah, and I think that that's the key to the whole puzzle is making those connections where possible and pushing it where possible, and being comfortable in growing, like in doing it differently. Like nobody knows everything, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm I, we as a club, Andy especially, oftentimes seen as zealots. Like, oh, we see it only from one perspective, but like in reality, like I'm a better coach now than I was 15 years ago, and it's because I know more now than I knew then. And I think, it actually, in part, I think 15 years ago, I coached maybe more from an ego perspective. Like my ego is more at play. This is the way to do it, and everybody had to fit into my box. And now I think I do a much better job of connecting with kids and figuring out how every individual kid within my team, how they tick and how they move, and coaching to that specific kid as opposed to coaching to the group, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Do you find that being a coach now is a lot harder because of the added pressures of social media and things, and parents wanting that instant gratification, that instant win? Or do you feel like your guys's program and the communication of what you guys are trying to promote and do helps alleviate some of that possible problems that maybe other coaches face, as far as that instant gratification and win and finding the next best shiny thing?
Yes and no. I think both. Like, yeah, I do think it is a more difficult environment sometimes because of that. There's more competition. That's a good thing, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
more. There's more paid coaches. There's more paid clubs. And I think that in general is a good thing, because it means that if you're doing it the right way, um, um, you've got a chance to attract people into your movement or your club or the way that you coach. I do find it easier for myself, and I think that's kind of what I was talking about before with my maybe maturing and lack of ego, is that I'm now really upfront. Like, so I think my families know exactly what they're getting when they come involved, and but it's not just like sign on the dotted line. Here's the contract. This is what you're going to get. I'm not going to talk to you again. And then I'm every halftime I'm doing when they're young over on their sideline, and every game we're having a post, we're talking about what we tried on the field, and so the communication is so prevalent that I feel like it's easier now because people know exactly the why behind what we're doing. Whereas before, I think they just knew what we were doing, and I didn't spend enough time educating them on the why behind it.
Yeah, and I think that's sometimes not communicated enough as far as what a coach's goals are or what they're trying to execute, and as far as communicating that to the parents and players. I know a lot of times, we communicate it to the players obviously as coaches, but maybe it doesn't get translated to the parents as easily. And sometimes they're going, what are we supposed to be doing now, and what's happening. So definitely making sure that that communication is there. And sometimes, I've seen people post in parent Facebook groups about, I tried to contact my coach about X thing and they never responded. And so I had to go through the manager or whatever. And maybe it's just that's the club's policy, depending on how big it is. And maybe they have a specific form of communication, but hopefully you know what that is going into it, and so that you're comfortable with it if you have a question or you want to discuss something about your player, that type of a thing, that what those forms of communication are going to be. Like for me, I've told my parents
Yeah,
numerous times, do not message me in Team Snap. That's our club's form of communication, is Team Snap. And I'm like, do not message me in Team Snap because I will not see it, because I am on like 6 different Team Snaps. And if I turned my notifications on, my notifications would be going off all day, all night. And so I have it turned off and I don't always check it. And so I'm like, text me or email me. And I still have parents that will message me in TeamSnap and I won't see it for a day or two. And I'm like, I'm sorry, but this is not how I want you to communicate with me. Like, anyway. So making sure that you know what those forms of communications are for your coaching staff, and that you are able to talk to them about that. So, really quick before we wrap up, what has been your biggest challenge as far as being a parent of players now? Especially like you said that you had coached your daughter who's now in high school. So how has that been for you as a coach going through that? And, if you've coached your kids or if you've seen they played under other coaches, how has that been for you, especially being a coach and a former player? How has that role been for you as a parent?
yeah. So two different kind of strands of an answer here. First, let me say I was actually chatting to another guy I coach with, who played at a high level as well, and we were both talking about how we find that parents that played at a high level, not necessarily soccer, but of some sports, they seem to be a lot more laid back as parents, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
because it is a marathon, not a sprint. And so I coach all 3 of my kids, but all 3 of my kids will guest play or double roster. Or, my daughter's now in high school playing for somebody else. So I coach all 3 of my kids, but I do have to get to be a soccer parent from time. And like, it's a marathon, not a sprint. Like the whole goal for me, for each of my kids and for every kid I coach, is for them to still be playing when they're 18. And hopefully playing at the highest potential level for them. And so like I'm pretty laid back. So I found my coaching has helped me, and probably my playing career has helped me just to like relax a little bit. Like Rome wasn't built in a day. Like this is going to have ebbs and flows and positives and negatives. The most difficult thing as a soccer parent coaching my own kids is that none of my kids are like me, right? Like, so I've had to figure out how to motivate them. And my main mode of motivation for the kids that I coach is enthusiastic praise times 10. My daughter is not motivated by that at all. In fact, maybe even demotivated for that. It took me years to figure that out. My middle son is motivated by that, and so I can lean into that really hard. But he said he refused to play soccer until he was like 8. My youngest son, I'm still trying. He's 10. I'm still trying to figure out how to motivate him. To be completely honest, like sometimes praise works, but too much praise does not work. And again, that's my main motivation, coaching motivation. So it's just it's just how it goes, I guess. So.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely different from both perspectives as far as being a parent of players and then also a coach and then coaching your own kids. There's definitely those different avenues and the ways that you have to navigate through them. I know I've talked about it before on other episodes with other people where I'm either coach or I'm mom, and I have to ask my kids, like on car rides home, if if usually it's just my older daughter, do you want me to be coach when I answer, or do you want me to be mom? How do you want me to answer
Yeah,
this?
I've
If you
asked
have a
that question.
question, how do you want me to respond? Do you want me to respond as your coach or as your mom? Like, because the answers are going to be different as far as what you want me to respond with. My twins that are 8, I don't, we had a game last night. I don't even think, we got in the car, and one of my daughters, it was really funny. They both like to play goalkeeper. Their older brother plays goalkeeper. So they each played a half in goal, and then they were both on the field. And one of them, her last game, it was really cold and it was like freezing, and she would not go back on the field, and she just sat there. And when she was on the field, she wasn't really doing anything. So I was like, "Okay, if you don't want to go on, you're not going to do anything. You can just sit there." And she was totally fine with that. And I was like, "Whatever." I mean, it was really cold and she's skinny. She was freezing. And anyway, so I didn't know how she was going to contribute on the field because sometimes, she really enjoys playing keeper. Um, but her grandpa was there and she really kind of wanted to show off for him. So in the second half, when she went on the field and I wasn't really sure what she was going to do, at the very end of the game, she got the ball and she was dribbling up the field. And I was like, oh my gosh, she beat like 2 players. And it was just like, I was happy as a coach and as a mom, like internally, that I didn't know what was going to happen with her play. And, she got the ball up there. One of the players on the other team ended up, clearing the ball out of the box, and then the game was over. But I was like, oh, so we were really hyping her up that she took that opportunity to, dribble up the field and beat a few people. And she was really excited to tell her dad. And our other daughter that was playing, she also had a similar moment in the game, but she's my more emotional one out of the two. And when I coach her, she thinks I'm getting mad at her. And so she's the one out of the two that I have a little bit more difficulty with in navigating it because, she started limping and I'm like, are you okay? And she's like, my foot hurts. I said, okay, well, let's take you off. And she got mad that I was going to sub her. And it was like a whole thing. And anyway, she ended up coming off anyway. But it's really interesting to see just the dynamics between having twins on the same team as well and how their emotions are different and how I have to coach them each slightly differently. And then, coming off the field, their emotions are different. One of them was like super excited. The other one was happy, but she was a little bit sad because she got scored on. And, so the emotions are also very, very different coming from those perspectives as well. It was a fun car ride home. Well, actually,
Yeah,
they went with their grandpa now that I think
yeah,
about it. I was like, no wonder there wasn't a chat after the game. They went with their grandpa after he got them Happy Meals. So they were super happy. But
yeah,
they,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
But is there anything else that you want to share with the listeners, either about you or your podcast? We've kind of touched on it slightly a little bit. For those of you that aren't familiar with Coaching Inside the Box, they talk a lot about the environments and the way that teams are developed, and obviously they talk about the club that they all coach for in Kansas City. But it's interesting to hear the different teams that they've covered as far as different countries and cultures and things that they talk about and how it translates to the game of soccer. But is there anything that you want to share from your perspective and maybe why you guys decided to start your podcast?
Yeah. So there's three of us on it. All three obviously coach for the same club. But we all three come from three different generations, and we all three grew up in three different countries, right? I'm American. I'm 40 now, 1983 birth year. Andy is older than that. He's in his 60s. He grew up in England. And Philippe is 10-ish years younger than me, and he grew up in Rio de Janeiro. And so essentially, the podcast is a discussion around soccer philosophy and development and all of those things, but we put a cultural spin on it, right? Like all three of us see the world and see soccer from our own youth and what that was, and so we oftentimes talk about whatever our specific developmental topic is, but through the lens of three different cultures. And I think it's kind of fun. We really get a kick out of it and are enjoying doing it. The I think the impetus for starting it was we believe in our approach to teaching the game, and so we wanted to talk about it at a wider bit. And we also joke oftentimes about how old Andy is, and death might just be around the corner for him. So we should probably start recording some podcasts so we can get Andy on recording, if you will, before we lose him to the next life. And if you're like, man, that's really morbid, if you listen to the podcast, you'll find that joking and teasing each other is all day, every day for every episode. So.
Mm-hmm. And what is your ultimate goal with sharing this information? I know it's more of a coaching and a helping, maybe from the coaching perspective, but is there obviously other avenues that you guys want to assist in, maybe giving that perspective from the coach's side or education for parents as well?
Yeah. Yeah, both. We're really big fans and believe wholeheartedly that individual development and encouraging kids to gain this brave, creative leadership skill set from the game of soccer is important to move society forward in a positive way. And so the more we can share that message with, the better. And so I think that's a big function of it. I wouldn't even say the majority of the listenership probably isn't in Kansas City and isn't within our club. And so it's not even really educating our own membership, if you will, on what we do. Of course, that's a component of it, but I think it's just looking to share what we believe is good with as many people as possible, and hopefully other people develop, to use some of it to improve their own coaching and improve their own soccer culture and soccer environment for where they are. But yeah, I mean, if we could have more creative, deceptive players in the United States, that would definitely be a big win. So
Mm-hmm. I'm kind of a history buff. I don't, it's really funny because I don't remember facts, but I love learning about historical things. So for me, listening about the histories of soccer development and culture in other countries has been very interesting for me to hear, and especially how their environments changed, and during like modern times how that has affected the growth of the game in countries that used to be so dominant, and how it has affected whether or not they're still dominant in those areas or not. That's been a very interesting theme for me to listen to. That's something that I've enjoyed listening about and learning about, as far as the different cultures and countries and developmental plans and things that they've tried to execute in other places, and maybe the reasons why certain areas were so much more ahead of their times and things, and how people are trying to replicate those but just in different areas, like you guys do with the boxes that you guys train in. And so I have found that very interesting information to hear about and learn about, because those are things that I didn't know about, but once I hear them I go, yeah, that actually makes total sense, but I never correlated any of that. And obviously, these are things that you guys have either read in books or learned about in other areas. But it's very interesting to hear and learn as far as me being a coach, because these are things that I didn't know. I don't know if my husband knew them. I probably could have asked him. But it's definitely interesting information that you guys share, and using it as a learning tool, and then obviously getting each of your guys different perspectives on it, because like you said, you guys come from different backgrounds, different generations, and so it's very interesting to hear each of your opinions on different subjects, and how you feel like they affect the soccer culture in our area or other areas.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. That's fun. If the one episode that I enjoy the most from that perspective, but it was, I think, maybe our second episode that we did. So it was early days, and none of us had any podcasting experience previous. But it was on Ashington, England. I think we actually got the director of Ashington, England's like football academy, reached out to us on Twitter, and then I ended up having a phone call with the guy to talk about it. But Ashington, England, is this small little bitty area that in the, I want to say it was the 50s, 40s and 50s, was a talent hotbed. I mean, the number of professional players that came out of this Nowheresville part of England was off of the charts. And it seems as though nobody has clued into this and realized that what was Ashington doing in the 40s and 50s that developed so many players that went on to play pro. And you see it literally fall off a cliff in the 70s. So the 40s and the 50s and a little bit of the 60s, you see all of these pro players. But then there were almost no pro players, late 60s, 70s, and beyond. And the difference was cars in the street. You can
Mm-hmm.
see it when you go back and look at old images, and Stanley Matthews, or not Stanley Matthews, Bobby Charlton and Jack Charleston, and there was another guy, I can't remember his name. Andy's English and from that era, so we talked about it. But like these guys like talk about in all their biographies, man, we played in the street all the time, and it was tight, and there were walls everywhere, and we just, that's what we did. And then all of a sudden, everybody had a car, and so nobody could play in the street again. And this small little, bastion of English soccer development. The reason that, two of the best players that won the 1966 World Cup grew up in Ashington, England, right? And all of a sudden now there's cars in the streets, and so Ashington, England doesn't have a place for these kids to play. And so now nobody is good coming out of Ashington, England, and it's really mind-boggling to think about how much those things impact development. So we talk about that often. So.
Yeah, it's very interesting, especially like I know I've discussed it with other people as far as just providing an environment for kids to just go play soccer, but they do it themselves. Like you don't see as many kids just going over to a park, especially in America, just going to a park and just getting a game together, of kids from around the block. You don't really see that happening anymore, and so that's kind of part of it. Whereas, and I don't know that in America we ever really did that, but trying to provide some sort of an environment so that kids can just go and play for fun, because doing something for fun more often, helps them develop even faster than if they're required to be there. And so one of the things that we, love about the neighborhood that we live in Utah is they have these small little green spaces all over the place. And so I have actually seen, including my kids, but other kids in the neighborhood who will drag their little bonet goals out to these tiny little green spaces, and they play soccer with their friends, or they train on their own, or whatever it may be. In our neighborhood in Utah, we, in this specific area, it's called Daybreak. If any of you have heard about Barbie Land that happened over Halloween, I live in that neighborhood. I think it was like on People magazine or something. It was insane. But anyway, we have this neighborhood where they have smaller yards, but then they have provided parks and green spaces within walking distance of every house. And so it's a little like courtyard areas that, they're all in different size and shape. And anyway, so being able to see more kids going out into these spaces together and playing soccer. I just saw some kids across the street yesterday when I was driving to my game, where they were out in their rec jerseys with, I think they must have been brothers, and they were out there playing together in this green space, So it's good to see that something like that is a little bit more common in my area than maybe it was when I was a kid. No, like I had in my neighborhood, I think the closest person that played soccer to me, other than like my siblings, was 7, 8 blocks away from my house. And so it wasn't somebody that was super close that I could just go, hey, let's go into this park and let's go play soccer. We had to bike or ride or whatever. It was a lot farther away for us to find people that we wanted to train with and play with.
Yeah, for sure.
Any lasting advice that you want to leave with before we close?
So have fun. It's a great sport. Relax. Like whether you're a coach or a parent, like it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. And so enjoy it. Like that's what it's all about. Sometimes I think we can take it a little bit too serious, even though it's very serious, as you can tell the way we talked about for the last bit. So, but
yeah,
Katie, I really appreciate you having me on, and it was a fun chat for sure.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for coming on. If you want to hear more about Andrew and Andy and Philippe's podcast, Coaching Inside the Box, I will link their podcast in the show notes. But thank you, Andrew, for coming on, and have a great day. Thanks for kicking it with me, and have a great day. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at kickitwithkatie_podcast _ between all the words. You can reach out to me with questions at kickitwithkatiepod@gmail.com. I also have a feature with SpeakPipe where you can leave me your own voicemail message if you want to be featured on the podcast. Rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.